This week's episode was brought to you by Troy Belford and HermeticMysterySchool.com, where the code The Whole Rabbit, no spaces, gets you $5 off Frater RC's Tarot Ritual Magic Bundle. If you're interested in taking your understanding of tarot a bit deeper, please consider checking it out. On this week's episode, I'm joined by Frater RC to discuss the Matrix, simulated reality, and why the moon is hollow and full of lizards. Near the end of the free show, we reveal the meaning behind the Great Seal of the United States and the esoteric symbolism contained within the Giza Pyramid. In the extended episode, we discuss the paths of the moon and the universe in the tarot, exploring the penetration of the Matrix from a ritual Hermetic perspective. If you'd like to be a nerd and join the rest of that discussion, visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where $5 gets you all our extended episodes, 2 bonus stickers, including a holographic designed by Mari-sama, and access to our Discord server. Thank you, and enjoy the show. What are we talking about? Dark City? Yeah, so when I
Dark City. Yeah. I saw it in the theater, like opening day. I took my mom to a matinee. We didn't know what it was, and we were just like, whoa, super thrilled.
When I rewatched it, I realized, like, shot for shot was stolen and put in the Matrix. Like, running along the rooftops even. There's so many just, like, shot for shot. And the choice of color.
Yeah, the Wachowskis are good at that. But they're like, they're interpreters, right? Like, they're good at taking things that, a lot of different things that have been done and developing them all together in a way that's sort of more than the some of its parts, right? But a perfected form of it. It's very Aquarian, actually, like the evolution of thoughts, the guiding of imperfect Gemini ramblings into balanced Libran equilibrium and sussing out into the Aquarian finalized form, which usually isn't their own idea, is just like the final perfected form, perfected thought. That's very much what the fixed air of Aquarius represents. So
those little Aquarius lines, that's what they would put the rabbit over in the Egyptian hieroglyphs. The zigzaggy lines.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the rabbit appeared on the surface of the waters. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Whole Rabbit, where we do more than just drop 10 tabs of acid and watch The Matrix until our hard-on for Keanu Reeves grows into a symbiotic auxiliary superintelligence capable of levitating tiny pebbles and doing city planning. Nay, we whip out our rave glasses and start blasting our high-frequency infrared carrot-colored lasers straight into the lizard's hidden moon base using our sophisticated lunar satellite laser telemetry array before putting boots on the ground and launching an awkwardly bouncy full frontal assault on the back of the lizard's base, because everybody knows the moon is hollow and full of lizards. Today, I'm joined by Frater RC, a teacher of Hermetic magic, podcaster, and friend of The Whole Rabbit. Tell us a little bit, where can we find you, Frater RC?
Ghostwood Forest. Look for a shimmering in the trees, step into the Black Lodge, and cross your fingers. Or you can take some mushrooms and jump down a rabbit hole. Or you can go to HermeticMysterySchool.com or MagicWithoutFears.com, and that's magic with a K, of course. Even though I don't like it, I have to use it. Thank you, Crowley. So find me on those websites for learning magic and talking about magic. That's basically what we do. Yeah, I'm also on YouTube and Spotify, iTunes, all that shit.
You can be found at the point of all places.
Pornhub. I'm with you about the moon and lizards.
Dude, thank you for coming on. I had a terrible job scheduling my co-host, and she has like a grown-up life with like a career where she does important work, so sometimes she can't make it to the recording, you know, and I'm over here just trying to decode movies and study Kabbalah. So
fortunately we don't have grown-up lives.
Well, I can't speak for you, but hey.
I pretend a lot.
It isn't that what it's about? Fake it until you make it. Like, I didn't want to be a grown-up. I liked being a kid. I had all my magic powers when I was a kid.
I like to make it till I fake it.
I'm gonna have to think about that one, Pai Mei. That one's crazy.
That's a brain scratcher.
I guess, where do we get started? Why the moon? There's probably never been a more profound mystery that's been more impactful on the human mind. None more personal and simultaneously transcendental than the orb which captured our eyes effortlessly as children as it danced and spoke in the twilight, lit our sacred hunts, and shone down upon the secrecy and forbidden passions alike. A primordial clock. Nothing is regular save for the equally mysterious bleeding of the tribe's women, the seasons of nature, her tides, and behavior of the beasts therein, all of which we depended upon for survival, all of which in apparent abeyance to her, the moon. So it's kind of a big deal, the moon.
Yeah, I've heard of the moon.
It's just kind of there, and I guess it has been for a while. And then the craziest thing is, like, let's say you have an interest in women. You notice somehow that magically, whenever this thing is full, all the tribe's women start bleeding. Because, you know, if they're all together in a group, it tends to happen around the same time because they sync up, right? And then they're all synced up to the cycles in the heaven, and then it's like, oh, there's something. Like, are they controlling the moon? Is the moon controlling them? Are they the moon? I guess, you know, I consider it kind of like our first mystery, right? As humans. It's like, oh, blood, oh, moon, woman, oh, babies. What the grug no understand?
Yeah, it is interesting. I'm sure the moon was, if you think about when we were just wandering around the jungles and hills and deserts, and every night we stared up at this white orb in the sky. You can imagine the stories we made up. We didn't just make up one story. We made up a lot of stories, and then someone else made up a story we didn't like, so we took a log and hit them on the head, and their story died with them.
Or we stole their story.
Like, yes, the new story is here. Stories within stories. Do you want me to tell you about the etymology of the moon?
Yeah, totally.
Is that for me? Is that shit for me?
Popcorn in there, man.
After all, everything under her is subject to the cycles of birth, life, and death, which she displays readily each month. In fact, it's the place where the word has its etymological root. According to Always Fair and Balanced Wikipedia, the noun moon is derived from the Old English mona, which, like all of its Germanic cognates, stems from the Proto-Germanic menon, which in turn comes from the Proto-Indo-European mensis, month, from earlier meno, genitive, meneses, which may be related to the verb measure, specifically of time. Though a fun fact about the root of moon, Mond in German, like, which is the word Mond, it's in German, the moon is the man and the sun is the woman. Die Sonne, der Mond, hence the man and the moon. So if you think about it, like, we have this big feminine association with the moon and the solar with the male, but that's not a thing in German culture, which is the origin of English linguistic culture and language. And so it's so culturally specific, these ideas, that we often totalize and then sort of declare to be the correct version, right? Like, the moon is feminine. If I was to go out and tell a bunch of hippies at the drum circle on the beach, which I love those guys. I'm a fucking hippie,
yeah,
right?
man.
And it was like, you know, the moon is a male force, and the sun is the life-giving female force. They'd be like, how could you say that? How could you say that? That's like, you're just trying to take over our thing. It's like, no, I'm giving you back the sun. They're like, we don't want the sun. We want the moon, bitch, because we're in sync with it with our bodies. But it's like, yeah, but now you're just appropriating German linguistic culture and reframing it to meet your own needs. So that's appropriation. And there's one thing that we all know is Germans don't deserve to have their linguistic culture appropriated. So the moon is a masculine force. The sun is a feminine force. A lot of people see it that way, and it doesn't make any sense to them why the moon would have any associations with women. Well, there's a head flip for you, right?
Okay. To be fair, though, I think the 28-day cycle thing, anyone who was watching it, that's kind of a thing, right? They're in sync there. Come on.
It's kind of a thing. It's maybe that's why we flipped it. We're like, you know what? There's this whole, like, women in touch with the lunar cycle. Maybe we should just switch the gender pronouns there. Of course,
right,
now we're just getting rid of all the gender pronouns or whatever. We're doing something. I don't know.
Look at pregnancy, the stages of womanhood, boobies. The moon starts out kind of small, and then it grows to its fullness, and then after its fullness, it kind of withers a little bit. You know, like a titty, I guess.
What if the sun and the moon are both bi?
They probably are. Right. I don't know. They're big. Yeah. I mean, I got into magic through space nerding and reading books about physics, which I don't have a degree in either, but I still got into magic.
What's physics?
Well, you know, like, if an object goes really fast, it shrinks along one dimension, all that stuff. Like, oh, that's weird. Like, time travel's a thing, according to physics. According to serious physics, it's real. It actually happens. So I was like, well, why can't magic stuff happen? Because physics says it can happen. There's teleportation and entanglement and all this crazy weird shit. And then they just explain everything in terms of a miracle anyway. So I'm like, pfft. So yeah, but hey, man. And then how Hecate is associated with the sun as well. So, and she's a goddess of the underworld. So, I mean, stuff gets mixed up. But in so much as mensis pertains to a woman's moon, and like we say the moon, it has some colloquial cultural weight, I think. We were just talking about the sun. So the sun is outside of the sphere of the moon. We know this both in physics and in the Kabbalah to be true. The moon, like any proper clock, changes regularly so we can measure time. After all, the sun more or less looks the same every day. It changes and it's the height throughout the seasons, but it's much more apparent because the moon changes quicker in time and it's regular. But then occasionally, when the moon and the sun run into each other, they appear to be equal in size. And then, even though they're equal in size, the moon always wins when they meet. And it's always, the darkness temporarily dominates. So, and that always happens when they meet. And so there's this, I think psychologically, I think that said something to everyone who would ever witness that, right? It's like, well, there's this dark and the light. And the light is maybe the more helpful, the more important, the one we want to associate with. But when the darkness comes, it's kind of like of primacy. When something comes into our immediate experience, it sort of blocks out the eternal and the spiritual like view of things. And you have to just like deal with it. And that could pertain to giving birth as a war, you know, take for instance, the man, right?
It's deadly.
If you are a male patriarch and you're the hunter and you own all these wives and stuff and you're in a very patriarchal society, even still, when your wife is pregnant with your seed and you are in a patriarchal society and your seed means a lot, she has all the power in the whole universe. And when she's going through labor, which is like, you know, happens once in, you know, a certain amount of time, like, she's the center of the universe. If something fails there, you're fucked. You have no power over that. You can't swing your axe at it. You can't scream at it. You know, you're powerless. You know, the moon dominates. Nope. The dark times dominate from time to time. And so I think the moon has an ancient conception with that, where we are closer to the moon than the sun. And we live closer to the realm of like suffering and death and change. So what I say here in the notes is the connection between the moon and the Matrix is a lot older than 90s blockbuster fiction. The word Matrix itself means womb and is derived from the word mater and means mother. Mother or mater also forms the root of the word matter, which according to Greek thinkers, like in Plato's Timaeus, because of matter's temporal nature, it is considered necessarily imperfect, never able to fully embody the abstract forms which were responsible for its construction in the first place. A sphere more properly associated to the sun, eternally shining in the darkness, etc., because the ancients weren't fucking retarded. They knew that the earth was a sphere. Look into it, hashtag.
Yeah, they did. I mean, the Assyrians, like, didn't they accurately know the planet cycles down to the second?
I don't know somehow specifically about the Assyrians.
Yeah, down to the second. So like they you know, when they looked at they had the math figured out of the planets to the second, which doesn't make sense. And didn't like the whole Nibiru thing. They knew there was this planet that comes through only very rarely, and somehow they knew that, which they should have not been able to know. So that's one of those things that sticks in the back of your head and makes you go, well, maybe what Sitchin said was right on some points. We just don't know.
Right, how they represented the planets as there being like 9, and it was heliocentric, right? I think it was heliocentric.
Yeah,
it was a big ass sun.
They had identified that their gods came down from Nibiru, which is this planet that has a broad orbit or something. I'm sure there's listeners who know the details more than us, but the idea is what matters and what's really interesting. Like, if they had this advanced knowledge that they shouldn't have been able to have, that does force us to ask certain questions, like how did they get it, or who did they get it from? And that's something that bugs me. Like, you know, it's not put to bed. That baby is not asleep. We haven't answered that question. And so it's crying once in a while saying, you know, feed me, and you look into it and you go, yeah, there's something there. That's an idea that we haven't dismissed or confirmed. And we have a lot of those. Those are my favorite things to explore, of course, the unknowns.
Well, I'm not dismissing the reptiles being from Nibiru for the sake of this episode. If that's their mother base, we'll say the moon is like their forward base, because I know it's full of lizards. And we're gonna prove it.
Okay, let's prove it. I mean, just so people know, like I'm the kind of guy who usually tunes out when lizards come into things. So this is not my normal cup of tea, but I'm willing to drink it with Luke, because let's face it, I would drink anything you handed me, Luke.
Well,
I'm
thank
just
you,
that
sir.
kind of trusting guy.
I have yerba mate.
Yeah.
There's a lot of caffeine, but you may
Worst
be a
case
heavier
scenario.
weight than me there. I don't know.
Trying. If I keep biking 15 clicks a day like I did the other day, that won't last long. So
Oh, dude, I got like
find the balance.
I got like 16 or 17.
I'll trade you like 50 pounds. You could use a few.
As the moon begins as nothing, returning to nothing, ever shifting in its phase, so do all created things undergo a transition from birth unto death. A quality philosophers like Plato considered a bit of a downgrade from objects that existed in abstraction or mind alone, like numbers, angles, arithmetic, basically what we might consider laws which govern the physical universe. Nowhere discreetly found, intangible, at least in nature. Nonetheless, to discover these abstract, intangible laws was the source of enlightenment and the truth of the world we were born into. According to Plato's allegory of the cave, that world we were born into is in the back of a cave, chained to a wall within its belly, and meant to stare at nothing save for the shadows cast upon the back wall by a group of puppeteers making figures in front of a fire near the mouth of the cave. I argue it is this concept necessarily, where the idea of nature as inherently evil has its firmest root in the Western mind. This ought to seem a little obvious, as the Timaeus is a text that pops up in most high schools and colleges as it pertains to both the Platonic solids and Plato's conception of the creator. The words they used, though, was demiurge, and this was prior to Christianity or Gnosticism. It's also not unreasonable to assume that somebody forced you to watch Plato's allegory of the cave at least one time in your life. So until somebody proves me wrong and there's a better originating text for the demiurge in all its official glory, the Timaeus that you got for Miss Chokes on Dick in 9th grade will do just fine. The appeal that Gnosticism today has, like its popular appeal, the mystery has been solved. We can stop asking the question on 4chan now. That's my point of this section, is this whole like, oh, why Gnosticism? Why the Matrix? Why is this stuff so popular? It's like, it's because it's classical Greek thought. And you can't just be like, you know what I mean? You can't just be like, delete, 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 delete. It's like, no, I'm sorry. Like Plato sat down, they decided this is how the universe worked. And then we've been memeing it and riffing off of it ever since. And if you subscribe to a Christian worldview, you've necessarily adopted some quote unquote Gnostic assumptions into your worldview. So I want to clear that up. So, okay.
Okay.
That's where we get the Matrix. Okay. Not necessarily Valentine. Blame Plato.
That sort of brings us back to the Dark City conundrum, right? Yeah. Maybe we're just the toys of extraterrestrials or multi-dimensional DMT fairies or something like that. Maybe we're more like we were in sort of a co-synchronous relationship to our physical reality. We still don't know what matter is, right? Like Plato said that. Roger Penrose still saying that. He's like, he's the reason he says you can't call me a materialist. He would like you not to call him a materialist, even though by all obvious forms he is one, is because, as he says, we don't yet know what the material is, what the matter is. So there you go. And that brings us back to the big question. So, the moon is definitely a representative of the illusory shifting nature of reality. I think one of the reasons, though, that nature was seen as evil is because if you think about it in those days, nature is what killed us, right? So if you had nature and spirit, if you had nature in one hand and spirit in the other, well, spirit wasn't killing you, right? It was nature that when you got a scratch, got infected and you died. And then you went into spirit. That was what their story was. You went up to the astral realm, which was literally the starry heavens above. And maybe you became a star yourself. I mean, that's what Crowley says. Every man and woman is a star. Probably he meant every androgyne as well, because he was really into that. And so we should shout that out for everyone who's post-gender here. And because Crowley was, as what's his name, clarified. You can find that on my YouTube page as a great talk by the OTO guy who's been kicked out of the OTO along with hundreds of others because they're pitching non-traditional gender roles within the Gnostic Mass, I believe, is the issue. He covers it better on my YouTube page. You can see that talk.
I don't know where he stands today, but I know Lamalu Duquette was saying, like, you do whatever you want, but like there's a certain recipe to make an apple pie, etc. And if you make it with something besides apples, it's not really an apple pie. I'm not in the OTO and I don't give a fuck, but that's just what I heard somebody say once upon a time. So
no, me neither. It's just sort of fun to look at from the outside.
And my lineage is more owes to like Genesis Peorage and chaos magic. So,
amen. I'm right there with you, brother.
I don't know. Well, here's what I have to say. If you think like gay people or bisexual people or whatever are disgusting, you just haven't met enough straight people yet.
We're going there, eh?
No, we're not. I just want to defend my gay peoples.
Awesome.
Awesome. Like half my Discord is a little bit gay. I think. I don't know. I don't even know what gender people are on my Discord half the time. But I do know
gender doesn't exist.
There is a lot of voting on both genders on our waifu. So, I have no problem.
What's waifu? I don't want to know. I don't know.
You don't want to know. You don't want to know.
I don't want to know what waifu is. I have got enough things like, I'm enjoying Instagram while it lasts. But when that moon phase is over, I won't be sad. I'll just I have good places to go to. So, and I'm really looking forward to real life again and human beings again and physical, contact. And so I'm not too, we use what tools we have on the noosphere, but once, we got to get back to real life. This is getting silly. I mean, you saw the riots in Australia the other day and like all this stuff. I don't want to focus on that too much. If they limit our speech online, there's always this thing called real life. Of course, that does bring us back New World Order we're entering, which is it's just weird. I don't know what to think of it. What do you think of it? You're in California. You're in hell. What's going on?
I do know that the suicide rates in LA are alarmingly high.
Is it alarming? Population control. I mean, that's what Greta's all about, right?
Oh, I don't know. We do want to talk about the Archons and the controllers, because as we slip further into this conversation, we're taking a grim tone on the forces which rule over society, as if to suggest we subscribe to the idea that that Archons are... Okay, so I don't...
Yeah, what are Archons?
So the lizards who live on the moon, right? We'll get there. How do the gods work? We're still talking about Gnosticism. We're talking about how we're specifically talking about Archons now. How do the gods work in D&D? Because the Matrix is my thing. The D&D is your thing. How do the gods work in D&D?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay, well, like let's say you're dedicated to a god, right? That's where you go and you die, right?
I guess that's the way it is. They exist on different planes, and you go to that plane when you're dead. I've never considered the metaphysics of Dungeons and Dragons to be all that interesting. It's more about the interaction between characters via human beings. The metaphysics of it never interested me. I was always interested in the real world was more fascinating to me than fantasy mechanics for sure.
That's the humor, is the comparison of the two and seeing where they're accurate and where they're wildly inaccurate. So the one place where they do line up, where they do line up, though, is actually the way that the gods work in D&D is not unlike how they're explained in the Timaeus, where there is a creator. I don't know if that's the case in D&D. There's an overall creator, and then this creator fashions the universe, and in fashioning the universe, establishes an equilibrium by placing different divine animals, which is a colorful metaphor of the zodiac, right? And these divine animals rule
D&D,
over...
a creator god.
There is?
Yeah, for Forgotten Realms, their creator god is Ao, which is very, very telling, right? Because just the letters A and O, Alpha and Omega.
Alpha and Omega, yeah.
And I think the idea is that Ao created all the different worlds in D&D, and then they're, connected through Spelljammer, and you can ride demon man ships into outer space and through the Phlogiston, which was an old idea of how space worked in reality. And it's not true, of course. There's this etheric phlogiston fluid that we're all moving through. And in D&D, each planet is surrounded by a crystal sphere that you have to penetrate to get into that planet. It's very erotic.
We call it the space-time manifold now.
Okay. Yeah, but tell me more about Archons. I want to hear more about Archons. What am I missing?
Well, here's the deal.
Are they lizards?
It's a little bit more like Skyrim, I guess, than D&D. But it's similar where based on your birth, you're sort of assigned to a certain star system.
Skyrim's what, like a millennial sex act?
Yes.
Is that like a rim but up in a plane?
It was an Elder Scrolls released in 2011 that was strangely prophetic of the American political climate. The whole idea is that when you die, you go to the god that resides over the aspect that most pertains to your nature, which borrows from the divine, but is equilibrated by there being other gods, which is a lot like our idea of the zodiac and being assigned a certain star system and a certain animal that helps you understand your higher purpose of your nature. That sounds kind of nice, right? But also, in terms of magic, our zodiac is seen as the forces of fate that rule over us. And that's one reason we create talismans, is to equilibrate those energies so we're not bound so ferociously to the negative aspects. And we have some sort of a transaction between what we're given and what we would like to aspire to. And so there is a bit of, in magic, a grim association between our birth chart, the forces of fate, and the archonic forces which control our destiny, right? Then if you take that to like even grimmer, more fictional vistas, you end up with the Gnostic demiurge being the architect of the Matrix, the creator of the Truman Show, the strangers in Dark City, and whatever invisible jerk stands behind the taunting Sonny and Cher's foreboding cyclical chanting of "I got you, babe," and Bill Murray's awakening to yet another eternal Groundhog Day.
Love it.
Like these become the cold, impersonal forces which rule over our lives. So, and the moon makes sense because it's the most obvious. Gravitationally, it's the sphere that rules over us the most. In terms of lizard anatomy, we have a vestigial eye from our lizard evolutionary days that detects light, that is most likely used by crustaceans to detect when the moon is full or some shit like that, where they crawl on the beach when the moon is full and they lay their eggs, and cancer is associated with the womb and the moon. And so in the Truman Show, the Archon, the head Archon lives on the fucking moon. He lives on the sphere of the moon. And then the strangers in Dark City, they're like an automated consciousness, like a simulated machine-like consciousness that doesn't understand the human soul, or the solar aspect of the human soul, you could say, to be redundant, I suppose. Even in the Truman Show, right? The world that exists outside of the Truman Show, the creator refers to as like fake. And you can see that the economy and cultural trends are created by Truman. The world sort of revolves around him, even though he doesn't know it, because he's like a child. He's a baby. He exists within the womb, which is what Matrix means. And he's within the sphere of the moon. And yes, it's the generative sphere. It's the sphere that contains the miniature version, which eventually grows to be the full version. So in Kabbalah, right, all of the sphere of the moon takes all of the forces that have been emanated by the other spheres and integrates them. It separates their unity. I don't want to say it like tests them, but it like concentrates them to their purest thing, which is kind of like what the womb does. And it's protective in that regard, but it's also limiting. And eventually the child grows out of it, which is, I guess that's supposed to be our spiritual destiny or whatever, is little solar beings we are, or some shit
it's a model of seeing ourselves for sure. We can definitely see ourselves that way. I mean, one thing that's good to remember with Kabbalah is the Sphirot, the Sephirot, are not the planets. They don't really correspond to the planets in the way we think. I mean, there's different models of that. Some things correspond and relate very naturally to the 32 intelligence of the tree of life, quite obviously, especially in, like, if you look at the Hebrew and the Sefer Yetzirah, it's quite obvious which intelligence connects which of the paths of the 10 spheres. But Crowley couldn't figure that out. So because he was reading it in English, and it doesn't make sense in English, which of the 22 intelligence connects which of the 10 intelligences of the Sephirot in the tree of life. So that's confusing. But then when we have the planets put on them, it's more of a guide, like how, so in Western Hermetic Kabbalah, we have the planets, from Saturn down to Luna as they are flowing down the lightning flash. And that's a useful model within our cultural and spiritual psycho-magical framework to use it as a Jacob's ladder, which is also like, this idea from the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, closely connected with the Merkava idea of riding a chariot up to God and ascending a ladder to heaven. Those are very useful ideas to us as far as theosis and spiritual divinization and self-perspection and journeying up the mountain of Abba Agnes to God is concerned, right? But in other models, that is looked at completely differently. So it's more useful and interesting to look at Yesod as the foundation, as what Yesod is, than just to say, see it through the lens of the moon, right? The moon can give us insight into what Yesod is, especially as regards our spiritual journey. But looking at as Yesod is just the foundation of reality makes more sense. So in that sense, Malkut is really the kingdom, as in it's the emanation of realities. It's not the real place, it's the projection on the screen from Yesod, through Yesod, which is why you have the four colors of Malkut. They're the other higher astral and Sephirah and Tiferet reflected through the indigo or the purple of the moon, and that's why you get the citron, olive, russet, and black. And it's like the lights are reversed, right? You know, so like Netzach's green goes through the violet, boom, you know, Hod, and then Tiferet for the citron. Yeah, so when you're painting your earth pentacle, what you're taking is the colors of those Sephirot, and then you're just adding in a tiny dash of purple of Yesod into them to create the four colors. And I like to think of Malkut as that reflected world. A lot of people think of Yesod or the foundation as the reflected world. But in fact, finally, I needed this for my next podcast guest later today. Scott Michael Stenwick, and this is his book, which I have to find. I got just in time to prep for my podcast with him. Shout out to my next guest, Scott Michael Stenwick, a master of Enochian magic and anti-psychedelic John Dee reader, and we're going to have that debate. We're going to get into the psychedelics, the OTO, magic, Enochian, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so you look at, don't look at the astral world of Yesod, the foundation, as this fickle, medial reality. Look at that as the foundation reality, and the kingdom as its manifest reflection on this screen, which is why when we tweak things in Yesod, in the astral plane, when we alter the matrix of the foundation, that's why our kingdom changes, because our kingdom is what's temporal and created and recreated all the time based on the higher worlds. So we affect the higher worlds, and the reflection of our universe in matter, in Malkut, in the kingdom, changes in accordance with it. It's why talismanic work is so powerful. It's why working with planets, planetary stars, why all that stuff seems to work really well.
So part of the brilliance,
that's
though,
the more stable world.
Like part of the brilliance, though, of the Truman Show is they just made it literal. I don't think it's literal. I do want some clicks, so I did name the show "The Moon's Hollow and Full of Lizards," but I do have a reason. So when you said, that it's the foundation. Well, in the same way how the womb and its reading of the genetic code is our foundation, it's kind of like that. So I don't actually think the moon is, but to come to the defense of that, though, the Earth-centric model, in the Earth-centric model, the Kabbalah makes a fuck ton of sense because the moon is closest, and then you can see Hermes and Lucifer, you can see Mercury and Venus out there going in front and in back of the sun, or in front of the sun, and then you can see the sun behind that, and then even further back you can see Mars and Jupiter, and then even further back you can see Saturn, and then even further back you can see the sphere of the zodiac, which they conceptualize as light being from the unmanifest or whatever. So actually, it's a really elegant metaphor, and then it works so well that you can just create the Truman Show and nobody even notices. And it's like when you first see it, you're like, oh, that was weird, and then it's strangely predicted the patterns of how media would work, and it's a very elegant Kabbalah metaphor. I will also say that in so much as Choronzon, it dwells at the abyss, right above Tifereth, right? That exists on the same. That's like the positive pole to Yesod on the negative, right? And so in the Truman Show, the dweller of the abyss, he literally talks to Truman when he gets to the door. He touches the edge of the womb, the sphere that he's in, and he's like, oh my God, this has all been fake. It's the first real thing he's touched ever. He climbs the stairs and he goes to the edge of the abyss, which is black behind. And then the creator wants to talk to him, and he talks to him what appears to be through the sun, which is interesting because we know he lives in the sphere of the moon, but for the first time in the film, they chose to represent him as a sun. So he says, I am the creator of a television show. And he explains to him that he's the center of the universe, basically, which is He kind of is, but he says nothing out there is real. He says, my world that I've created for you is just as real, but you're safe here, which is what Corazon would say. And he has to like get over this voice and step through the void. And then it shows his girlfriend coming down the stairs. They don't hug or anything. So I think it's cinematically there to represent the soul descending down to meet the prince, the fairy prince kissing the princess, but you know, the soul descending to meet the body or whatever. And the union of the divine.
Especially as Corazon would, he'll say anything. He's like a chatterer, and the only way to get past is with
he'll lie to you with the truth. He told him nothing but the truth.
Yeah. So you do want to just ignore everything Corazon says and just move past up to the supernal light. But it's interesting. I like what you said about Tiferet and the sphere of beauty, because the way I like to think of the tree of life is like, I think another one of the fundamental flaws that Crowley had and a lot of people had is that Keter is the highest achievement. But in the old original Golden Dawn system, Tiferet was the highest achievement, and that makes sense kabbalistically from one model of it. Because if you think of the tree of life, like we all know, Malkut is in Keter, Keter's in Malkut. So Keter and Malkut, right? One's just the point and it's spinning infinitely fast, and the other one is slowed down into the Philfolk cross of nature. So we get this manifest illusion of matter. But when you think of Malkut and Keter as being the same, and what you're doing is you're folding the tree of life over on itself, right? You're folding it in space. And then all of a sudden, so the supernals some sort of connect with the astral triangle or Yetzirah. But either way you slice it, then Tiferet, beauty, becomes the highest Sephirah. And that is the place where you want to ascend, is to that throne. That's the throne where you meet halfway, and the holy guardian angel descends to take root in your life and in your being, and you communicate fluidly and have control over all things. That's the classical mythology of theosis, you could say, divinization. And it is interesting to think of really the midpoint being the point of ultimate achievement. It's a fun model to play with in your head, rather than this idea that you want to just run up the tree to the neshama, to the supernals, and become annihilator, and running around calling yourself an absissimist. It's just sort of silly. Like, who would want to be annihilated? Wouldn't you rather be like this cosmic being of light that hereafter is flying through DMT realms with some consciousness and this body of light that's aware of shit and can move from realm to realm and truly become its hermetic, hermesial, fully manifest, divine, Ishim, holy living one type of being? Like, that would be a nice way to spend your afterlife. That wouldn't be so bad. And it seems to me, from my experiences in ritual as well as entheogens, there's definitely a chance that you could end up with your God, so to speak. Like, if you live a certain kind of life, you could very much be attracted into these realms. Because when you go into use it, something like psilocybin or DMT for entheogenic work, you often find that the ritual preparation really does affect where you go and what you attract in that realm for as long as you're there. So, which is why it's so helpful to do really good light work or positive work, unless you want to go to a strange place, because and I think when you die, you could probably end up in some pretty warped realities for what seems like an eternity.
Yeah.
But back to the moon and aliens, just to say for those mad motherfuckers who I love so much, who are into that shit, because seriously, keep making videos about aliens and moons and all that stuff. And I love all that shit. Please keep, I want to hear as much of that as I can, because I need something to do when I'm stoned once in a while. And the first time I did DMT was with Chris Bennett. This was not Changa, but DMT. I did go into, the astral space, I guess. But what I saw there, shockingly, was these reptilian beings who told me to go back and make sure as many people did DMT as possible. Tell people to do as many people as you can to do as much DMT as they can. I
love that story.
It was so weird that I was so weird when I saw these reptilians. They were very distinct beings, like sitting there around some crystals, and they looked over me like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" And I told them who I was, and they were like, "This is what we need you to do." And they were glowing inside. And what was so weird is was not an aliens or reptilian guy. Back then, this was a couple of years ago now, I wasn't even like a aliens person. person. I was like, no, there's no aliens. I mean, there probably is somewhere, somehow, but I didn't know much. I didn't really look into it much. I never gave it much time or space. Then COVID happened. I had lots of time on my hands to watch a lot of crazy shit. And now I'm not sure. No, I'm not sure. Could there be aliens here now? I don't know. Maybe. There's certainly like either multi-dimensional vessels. I mean, the sightings of ships and the abductions it's just I've looked at all the Travis Walton stuff and all the stuff that everyone's looked at this point. And if you haven't looked at it, you're really shirking your responsibility as a human being.
Well, I mean, the Navy's admitted the damn things are real. And before COVID, I sort of thought that Sasquatch might be a psychedelic experience. But since COVID, I've come to appreciate that it's probably a giant primate, and we smell and suck at hunting way worse than it does. And that's all there is to it. But it's just a big old primate. Here's a question
for you. Here's an inconsistency within that narrative that I'd like your thoughts on, because the government came out and admitted that we have extraterrestrial spaceships. Basically,
the UFOs basically,
not made of.
We don't know what they are. They go fast.
They said we have them, and then that lines up with all the stories we've been told. Yeah, the government, American government, your government, man, said that we have ships not made on this earth. They said that. It was just
too depressed to care.
It was tough. Yeah, it was tucked in there at the beginning of COVID and quarantine. And I remember thinking, oh, this was good timing to announce it, because everyone's gonna be like, who gives a fuck? Like, you just told me not to go to work. And some of us realized it was going to last a year. Some of us were like, no, it's just 14 days to stop the spread. And a bunch of us were like, you're full of shit. Yeah, no, the government's never giving us back the power they just took away. Not anywhere in the world. That's just insane to think that they would. To think that they would is literally to ignore all of history en masse.
Well, I was taught in my exceedingly liberal schools here in California that once you give government power, it tends to keep it. And that's just what I was told as a liberal. So I don't know. It's just
yeah. See, up in Canada, we don't mention what power the government doesn't have, because the only power the government hasn't taken in Canada is stuff that they were too incompetent to notice they didn't have. Like, they're like, oh, did I miss that bit of power? Oh, now they thank you for mentioning that it is there. I will take it now. Thank you very much. Yeah. Like the First Nations can't be like, you're trespassing on this land. They're like, oh, is that your land? Oh, well, we did not mean for you to keep that. Thank you very much. We'll take it back.
Here's the deal. Within the Timaeus, these forces that rule over our destiny, right, are seen as like positive. They're like, oh yeah, these are equilibrated aspects of the divine. Each is kind of special, and well, wow, we get to have our cake and eat it too. But by the time we get to the allegory of the cave, which is in the same ontological system of belief, more or less, they're sort of seen as bad guys. Okay, so within the allegory of the cave, the protagonist frees himself, and he gazes upon the fire, which at first is blinding and no more intelligible than the shadows. Less so, in fact. Besides the brightness and the dark dancing figures about its source, the protagonist has never gazed on anything other than the flat plane of his own wall, which this confusing spectacle is clearly emanating. Eventually, the protagonist comes to see the figures dancing about the fire, putting on a show with their animal puppets, continually entraining the chained captives who know nothing else but the shadows cast by these beings. Being careful, the protagonist slips out of the cave and enters upon a brightness both painful and utterly blinding, for his eyes have scarcely left the wall upon which he was transfixed his entire life, let alone the outside world illuminated by the sun. Quickly enough, however, the brightness settles into clarity, which reveals boundless beauty after beauty, ones perhaps indescribable to a freshly escaped prisoner of the cave. Eventually, however, the protagonist begins to reflect upon his comrades, still shackled within. Returning to free them, however, he finds the darkness of the cave equally as blinding as the sun once was. The air is thick and mixed with smoke, and the sound of the puppeteers doing their show. To the sorrow of the protagonist, his old comrades, still entirely consumed by the shadows of the wall, forsake him as crazy, unbelieving of the shadow's true nature, let alone the relatively unbelievable story of a world outside the cave, lit by a heavenly fire unquenchable. Their chains become a comfort and affirmation of their false reality. The protagonist, ever alienated from the world in which he was born, chained, and awoken from.
We're going to discuss that now?
Well, here's the thing. My point is that we have been encoding these mystic ideas into artwork like The Truman Show for quite some time, but it's been going on a lot longer than that. And also, the allegory of the cave lines up pretty well with the Kabbalistic tree of life. It's just had its emotional charge kind of sucked out of it and put nerd glasses on and spoken in stereo instructions rather than a Keanu Reeves movie. But you put the two together, and you got a fucking blockbuster. That's my point.
Yeah. Well, so to answer the question, I did bibliomancy with Scott Stenwick's book here, and here's what the page it landed on. So here's what Scott answers to the question you just read, because obviously this is how reality really, really does work. It should be noted that these talismanic designs for the Watchtower angels are rectangular figures, whereas those for the Heptarchial angels are circular. As modern readers of Dee's diary are left guessing at the designs for the Great Table talismans, none of us can ever be sure, but rectangular tablets are the most obvious solution given the manner in which the names are derived from the quadrants and subquadrants. There may also be some deeper symbolism related to the alchemical concepts of squaring the circle involved in the transition from the planetary spheres to the elemental realms. Shockingly apropos.
So what do squares and circles usually represent in the esoteric symbolic language of dictionary of thought?
Circles are people who are in touch with the circular Sephiroth, and squares are losers.
Well, squares are physical, right? And the circles are the eternal and the abstract.
Yeah. Actually, there's a Lon has a great a description of how those squares, that whole process geometrically is a way of seeing to understand the universe, the rows on the cross, and the entire cube of life that becomes the cross, and and then the Hebrew letter bursts from that in his understanding of the Book of Thoth. So this is stuff that there's some interesting Kabbalistic ideas to do with this basic geometry that we get from Pythagoras and the school that informed his learning, because he was, of course, just a representative of a long tradition of thought. He wasn't
he's just writing it down.
Just came up with shit. Well,
Socrates didn't write Socrates didn't write anything down.
Student. Not that we know of. Well, Plato was Socrates' student.
Yeah.
Was that
but Plato did write things down.
How can I confuse that? Yeah.
That's why we can read Plato, but not Socrates.
Yeah, and anyway.
So
what's the point of that? Who knows?
My point is the allegory of the cave is one example where it's taking Kabbalistic symbolism and mystical symbolism and attempting to encapsulate the truth in a piece of artwork, right? And so is the Truman Show, so is the Matrix, so is Dark City, and that's one reason that they have such a.
I'm more a Synecdoche, New York guy myself, dude. Yeah, okay. I'm more of a Synecdoche, New York person than Truman Show. Though now after this podcast, I should rewatch Truman Show. I think I'd probably like it a lot more now. I saw it in the theater as a kid, right? But yeah, I should watch that again.
We wanted Ace Ventura as a kid. It is a Kabbalistic riddle, a lot like Ninth Gate, which also was billed as sort of like a horror movie, and it's more like a campy comedic satire of the journey within the occult towards spirituality.
For sure.
I mean, it's just not what it was billed as. So, but Truman Show has lived on, and it has only grown in its popularity because it's the same story as The Matrix. There's just no killing or violence. Like I showed it to my kiddo and she loved it. She wanted to see it again. I was like, whoa, I wasn't that smart when I was a kid. So fuck it, whatever. All right.
That's really cool though.
But so that's
like Truman Show.
So you can take divine wisdom and put it in stuff, right? And that's my big point here. The most important one, we might not even think of it because it's so ubiquitous, and that would of course be the pyramids of Egypt, the Giza pyramids. Apparently, this mysterious piece of art was so inspiring that it warranted becoming the primary symbol on the obverse of America's Great Seal, bearing the inscription Annuit Coeptis Novus Ordo Seclorum, which broadly translates to Favor Our Enterprise, a new order of the ages. And while sidestepping any potentially ominous meanings as of yet, we might infer that the pyramid is a symbol of divinely inspired undertakings, enterprise, or work, one meant to last the ages. Say what you want about this ambitious new order, whatever it may be, divinely beneficial, infernally nefarious, or somewhere in between, the divine majesty and perfection of the Giza pyramids is invoked to symbolize it. Thus, by studying the symbolism inherent in the pyramids, we can come to a greater understanding of their divine mysteries and what it has so to do with the American dream. Now, I'm going to attempt to explain squaring the circle and what it has to do with the Great Pyramids. I don't visualize things so well, so I'm going to give you the gluten-free version.
I'll help you with visualization for next time.
Because I don't visualize so great. So I'm going to attempt to visualize this for people that hopefully can. And so hopefully you'll see what I'm seeing. For starters,
you got to do my tarot.
Yes.
You got to do my tarot contemplation ritual meditation at hermeticmysteryschool.com.
I would love to.
I'll get you a free code. Yeah. It'll help your visualization like that.
Thank you. I have a lot to learn from you, man. For starters, love you too, dude. Fucking fat 93s. What is squaring the circle, and why should we care? Well, for
non-OTO people.
Okay, so for a guy who said to do a number of impossible things before breakfast, Lewis Carroll took some interest in demonstrating the act of squaring the circle to be quite impossible, which is mathematically proven by the Linderman-Weierstrass theorem of 1882. Okay, but wait, what is squaring the fucking circle again, Luke? Okay, squaring the circle is a problem proposed by ancient geometers. It's the challenge of constructing a square with the same area as a given circle, but only using a finite number of steps with a compass and a straight edge. It's pretty simple. You're like, I gotta turn this circle into a square, or I gotta turn this square into a circle. And they're like, how do we do it? I don't fucking know. There's no like, oh, you just do this, that, boop, bop, it's done. There's like, it's always gonna be a little more complicated than that, is what they're saying, I think. So long and the short of it, trying to measure a square with the same space as a circle is a holy pain in the ass. Such a pain in the ass is it. It has been proven to be more or less impossible, coming to mean colloquially doing the impossible. So the reason it's impossible, according to Wikipedia, is that the solution of the problem of squaring the circle by compass and straight edge requires the construction of a number pi squared. Pi squared is constructible. It follows from standard constructions that pi would also be constructible. It's not. And so the circle represents there's this infinite quality that's been employed to create it, which is pi. It's indeterminate. It has no pattern. So it's employing the infinite, whereas the square, not so much. It's more physical, right? It's more like, no, it's just fucking edges, bro. Like it's easy to put together. So turning a circle into a square and a square into a circle is devilishly hard for some reason. And it proves to be a metaphor for the transformation of spirit into matter and matter and spirit, blah, blah. Not meaning to sound glib, but I do that. So, essentially, the pyramids
that's the mystery. That mystery is addressed briefly again in the Keter-Malkut equation with the Filfo cross, which is a square in Malkut, but when you spin it infinitely fast, it becomes a point in Keter in the crown. So that's they touch on that briefly. But the pyramids is a fascinating thing to bring in here because again, like they confound us. They do confound us. Anyone who thinks we figured out the pyramids or how they came to be and how there was similar ones other places. I mean, pre-existing civilizations a possibility, extraterrestrials a possibility. Multi-dimensional knowledge through ritual or entheogen or
there's a lot
different stages of consciousness. Those are all possibilities. They're possibilities. They're not necessarily likely, but they do need to be still investigated for sure. And I think a lot of us do think the answers will come with the perception finally of dark matter. But until then, hey, it's our ball game, eh?
There ain't no dark matter, dude. That's a bunch of bullshit. Anyway, there ain't no fucking dark matter.
You white supremacist. Well, it's a catch-all name for everything we can't perceive. So
I'm gonna cut out you saying that because then
dark matter. You know what dark matter is?
Yeah, it's a mathematical fudge factor. Anyway, I want to get back to pyramids. We already talked about this on one of my other shows.
What are you talking about?
Dark matter ain't shit, dude. We can talk about that on another show. Dark matter ain't fucking shit, dude. I'm with Peter Carroll on this one.
Scientists like who are perceiving it, about to perceive it, man.
I'm sure you can put it in an equation and say whatever you want about it. That's the whole point of it. So that your equations make sense.
It's a thing, and we're going to see it very soon, and then you're gonna send me a gift basket.
We're not, because then it's not dark matter, is it? If you can see it, it's not dark. You never see it. It's defined as something we will never experiment with. Can I continue about the pyramids?
This is why I love talking with you, man. This is why I love talking to you.
It's not dark matter if you've perceived it. It's something else. It's actually fucking matter. So it's not a thing. Anyway.
Well, you matter to me.
Thank you. You matter to me too. 93s again. So, okay.
Oh,
so, all right. Proving dark matter is a good example, right? It's like basically an impossible undertaking, but we're going to attempt to do it anyway. All right. So that's the squaring of the circle. And so the pyramids, in a sense, are the Egyptians flexing on us, being like, we can do it, you fucking losers. And I'll try and prove it here. Now, this is the gluten-free version. You take the base.
This is interesting, though.
So you look at this is mostly happening in flatland, right? You're going to be mostly looking from the top down. Mostly. There's a little bit of three-dimensional stuff going on. It's mostly from the top down. So starting from there, a pyramid looks like a big fucking square with an X in the middle, right? Big fucking square. And the square, the base of the pyramid is the square part that's touching the ground. That's the square. So that's the base of the pyramid. We'll call that the pyramid square, the big square that the base makes. So each side of this square is the same because it's a square. Let's call those sides 11, right? Now, if each side of the pyramid square is 11, the pyramid's height itself, the tall part, the middle part of the pyramid that's rising exactly from the center is 7. It's 7 tall from the center. So if we take that center line that's running up through the capstone that's 7 tall and we push it over like the wind does on a tent at Burning Man, you just push it over and it falls directly over 12 o'clock of the square. So right on the flat edge instead of its point, right? It sticks out a little bit. Like, yeah, so what? Okay, well, if you took that 7 line that falls just outside of that square and you start winding it around like a clock, it would create a circle that perfectly squares the base of the pyramid. So the pyramid is a 3-dimensional squaring of the circle in stone. In short, mathematically and architecturally and spiritually, the pyramid represents the infinite factor of the circle becoming manifest in the limited material universe through perfected work, or matter suffused with spirit through divine principle, or even more simply, spiritualized matter. Matter which has been organized according to spirit, the invisible made visible, a dwelling place for the divine. As above, so below. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is the moment when the word became flesh, blah, blah. The American dream is to build something really cool based on one's inner light and one's inner eye, one's eye of providence, and start working on it, even if it's impossible, yada, yada, yada. Can we get a hand for JPL and NASA putting that fucking weird ass crane parachute booster monstrosity on Mars without any problems?
Woohoo. I was watching the live stream footage and it is phenomenal. I mean, whatever director and soundstage they used to do that it even beats the moon landing.
Look, man,
I'm joking. I know it's real, people. I know it's real. I believe it's real. Even if it's not real, I still believe it's real.
I'm going to give my 30 seconds. It's all conspiracy and it's also not speech right now. I think it's completely possible that sometimes they fake footage, right? That they show us on there because they're actually finding weird shit there based on strange geometrical magical thinking that they use and they can't tell us about. Like they're using weird geometry to be like, oh, I bet we'll find another pyramid if we go here, and then they do, and then that's like, oh, I guess that leads us to another clue, and then just fake the footage. That's what I think is possible. I'm not like, I don't have an inside. I believe in you, JPL. I think we are on Mars. I don't. That's me. Call me a JPL shill. Fucking hail the Antichrist. God bless America. Fuck all the haters. Eat fat 93s and liquor collective 156. We put helicopters on Mars. That's an occult ritual. That might be the reason they did it. It's like, we need to put a helicopter on Mars. Why? Because we have to. It's not like, you know what I mean? I don't really. Anyway, that's just like my opinion, man.
I want some Mars dust. I want some Mars dust or rock to like glue into my Mars sword and like paint onto the lacquer. Like, yeah. I want that. So bring me back some Mars dust, Elon and JPL, please.
Can you imagine how powerful that would be? Oh my goodness gracious.
It'll be so powerful. You have no idea.
It would literally cost billions of dollars at this point in history to do that, which is amazing. To use that in magic, it's like, well, that's probably going to work.
Okay, but that's not all, folks.
That's not all. So what have we established? The pyramids are basically the Egyptians flexing on us, being like, look, we can square the circle and put it in flesh, and it's a really cool metaphor, even better than the Truman Show or the Matrix without Keanu Reeves. It's like, okay, great, thanks. We will never figure this out. And build it with
stones quarried from miles away somehow.
Man, did they just make it like Jell-O, and then they found a way to like put a blow dryer on it and turn it into stone or something? Like, I don't know. That's what I think. Okay, but what does it mean? Wiggers. So here's the deal, though. So what have we established so far? We've got a big square, and we've got, well, if you put that 7-inch pole outside the square and you draw a circle, we've circled the square, right? Okay. You can do something even better. So take that pyramid square we have, and then draw a circle inside of it so it pushes up against the edge, right? So I think it's called inscribing a circle in the square. I might be wrong, but you're basically putting a circle in there. Yeah. And so it's top, it's bottom, it's left, and it's right. The cross sections are touching. Okay. Now, your little 7-inch pole is sticking out of the circle the same length that's sticking out of the square because they touch at that part. Now, if you draw a little circle emanating...
Is a 7-inch pole little?
The pool is closed. So anyway, due to COVID. So if you draw a circle, right, from the tent pole that's sticking out, and it emanates from the center of that tent pole, it creates a circle, right?
Yes.
And the center of that circle is right on that circle that's squared the pyramid base. It's like that circle is like on that orbit now, right? You can, the way the ratios work out, the Earth fits within the big sphere and the moon fits perfectly within the smaller sphere in their relative sizes.
Yes. How did they do that?
How the fuck did they do that?
Yeah, I'd like to know.
Okay.
Let's go talk to some Egyptians.
So anyway, here's just to break it down. I believe that the Egyptians, in their own Kabbalistic interpretive way, are saying that that the spirit is becoming manifest through time, and that it's a process that occurs through evolution and through work, essentially.
Yeah.
So I guess before we get too into the weeds, I wanted to go to our trusted sex magician girlfriend, Dion Fortune. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Because our magic pouch has gotten a bit crowded with different bits and bobs, and she's going to help us put it together. So
yeah. Well, you can always trust a sex therapist who has sex one time, does one course, and then opens up an office on a main street as a sex counselor for Victorian people. Like that was the qualification to be a sex therapist back then. You take one university course, have sex one time, and you're like, okay, let me tell you all how it is. It's called being ahead of your time. I love Dion Fortune, but that shit's sort of crazy. It's like it was like the life coach of the Victorian era.
Here's what she says.
Like, I had sex, I'm traumatized, I need to talk about it, but I have no money, so I'm going to charge you to let me talk to you about my issues with sex now that I've had it one time.
She's just ahead of her time.
I don't know.
That's what we do today. It's
continue. Like let's explain. She was ahead of her time, man.
Did that without the internet. Think about it for a minute.
It's amazing how anyone ever lived without the internet.
I mean, can you blame a magician for living like many years ahead of her time? I don't know. So she says that the Sphere of Yesod proves and corrects the designing of their representations, disposes of the unity which they're designed without diminution or division. This concept is further illuminated by the nature of the spiritual experience assigned to Yesod, which is described as the vision of the machinery of the universe, right? So it's the fluid waters of chaos being finally gathered up and organized by means of their representations, which were designed in Hod. And it's their final proving and correcting ground, disposing of the unity of these representations. And then the image resulting from their organization is this machinery of the universe. And so to paraphrase, it sounds like she's saying the moon takes the unity that the sun has created. It's separated in Netzach. It's given different titles and names in Hod, and then it's sort of handed off to Yesod to finish the work of turning the various parts into a unified whole that reflects the original unity, but more quantized and broken into parts, assembled each according to their nature, like a pyramid. So to remember how we mentioned the moon, it has 4 primary phases: new, waxing, full, and waning. So keep this in mind as our witchy magic girlfriend Dion Fortune continues. The material universe is an insoluble riddle to the materialist because he insists on trying to explain it in terms of its own plane. This is a thing that can never be done in any sphere of thought. Nothing can be explained in terms of itself, and only by being resumed in a greater whole. The 4 elements of the ancients find their explanation in a 5th. The ether, as initiates have always maintained. For it is a doctrine of esoteric philosophy that any 4 visible states always have in their root a 5th, an invisible state. For instance, the 4 worlds of the Kabbalists have their root beyond the veils of the unmanifests. It's only by positing an unmanifest 5th and assigning it 2 certain attributes, deduced from the manifest 4 as being essential and prime cause, that we're able to arrive at any understanding of the nature of the 4. So we find in Yesod an unmanifest 5th of the 4 elements of Malkuth. So that's like what you said, how you add purple to each of the tones of the colors of Malkuth before adding it. So that brings us back to the pyramid, which Malkuth looks like a pyramid, but circular, I guess. The cross of the pyramid, or the cross of matter, is made manifest and encircled by spirit, which is represented by the moon. In this metaphor, the earth, Malkuth, the kingdom, is the manifestation of God's womb, which is in Yesod, the foundation for the created universe. Likewise, this room receives and organizes the light it receives from the sun, which is split and organized according to their nature in Netzach and Hod. Okay, but seriously, where does the Keanu Reeves shooting gun and fancy outfit come in? I'm still not satisfied. Well, sorry, if you want to hear the rest of it, you're going to have to pay me $5 now that I've almost convinced Frater RC that the moon is hollow and full of lizards. So once again, where can we find you, Frater RC?
I'm on Instagram still for now, Frater RC. I'm on YouTube, Frater RC. Somehow find me. Just search it on the engine because I don't get to have a designated name like you until I get 1,000 subscribers or some shit like that. And the main places are my podcast, where I have like exclusive stuff and lots of bonus shit on the website, www.hermetic or magicwithoutfears.com, magicwithoutfears.com with a K in the magic, because why not? And hermeticmysteryschool.com if you want if you want to learn hermetic spirituality and ritual practice and tarot technique and visualization, all that stuff, and do weekly classes there, and put up the recordings for you to download or purchase or whatever. I'm going to make this whole video just exclusive to my podcast subscribers. So if you want to see the full video that we just did with us, you can see it on my website, magicwithoutfears.com, on a special secure page for subscribers. You can listen to the podcast to get the password if you're a subscriber. And that's only $7 a month or $50 for the year. That's the best way to support my work as well. If you like all the time I spend talking to cool people. And in a couple hours today, after I make a salmon curry and do my research, I'll have Scott Michael Stenwick, an amazing dude who's a Enochian magic course I did through Jason Augustus Newcomb. And in the video link to this for my subscribers, you can find a link to do that course as well for only $100. So lots going on, man. Lots going on. And it's great to hang with you and talk about this stuff again. I love that you brought up a lot of cool movies that I enjoy. And Dark City, I'll talk about Dark City anytime. We could watch it together and film our reactions sometime
I'm not done with you yet. This is just the first half of the show.
I'm ready. Let's go, baby.
And if you'd like to hear the second half of the show, please visit www.patreon.com/thewholerabbit, where for $5 you get all the extended shows, stickers, access to our Discord, and I don't know, I'll send you a picture of my armpit if you ask really nice. I don't fucking know, dude.
Yeah. Or watch the whole video on my website. Same sort of deal. Yeah, cool. All right, we've pimped each other to the max. We're both pimps and whores.
And all that's left for us to do is eat carrots and shoot lasers.